Hi guys, welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to show you how to find, mine, and process clay from the ground. Now there are different soil types, some of which are better for finding clay. So this here is just regular topsoil that is most commonly found on the top layer of ground, obviously. This is not what you want for purifying and finding clay. This usually has a very low concentration of clay in it. So if you find the right kind of soil, you can find a lot of clay. Now, you don't want topsoil. What you want is this kind. This kind of soil is usually found underneath the topsoil. Usually is brown in color, and when you get it wet, it's malleable. This is the best kind of clay for processing. You can see it's pretty much pure clay with very little impurities. Now there's very little sand in this and very little organic matter. Now this here is a pinch pot my brother made with this kind of clay purified for my mine. You can see the color of it. You can easily make different objects. Under all this, I have my clay pit. It's a big hole in the ground where I mine all my clay. Now here you can see the big hole where I get all the clay. I've been mining in here for a long time now, so it's really deep. You usually don't have to dig very deep to get to the clay. In this particular area, it's about a foot and you hit the clay. You can see the layer of topsoil and then the clay material underneath. That clay layer underneath is what you want to get for mining. So I'm going to start mining it out. Now I have a big post digger that I use to mine it. Once you've found a sufficient amount of clay, you can start to purify it. Okay, now the first step is to take the clay and mix it with water in a big bucket. Now you can already see the organic stuff floating to the top, like leaves and grass. Now you want to mix it up until the water becomes a clay slurry. All the clay will dissolve into the water, leaving the sand particles and other debris sitting at the bottom of the bucket. It usually takes a long time for the clay to dissolve into the water, so you might have to have it sit overnight. Now the next step is to pour the clay water into a different bucket, leaving the gravel and other heavy material at the bottom of the bucket. Now to remove the organic impurities on top, you can use a strainer or a mesh from an old door or window. I'm going to be using the screen from an old door. Now carefully pour the solution into the bucket. Now you can see all the impurities that is not clay and hasn't dissolved into the water. The clay dissolves into the water, and everything else that's heavy enough goes to the bottom of the bucket. Now you can see there's very little impurities on top. That's because we used dirt that was mostly clay, rather than mostly being sand and gravel and other organic material. Next, you want an old t-shirt. Now what you want to do is tie a knot in it just above the sleeves. Now this will be the final filter and filter out the sand. Use something like a rubber band to hold it on. Now pour the slurry through the filter. Make sure to do this slowly. After filtering out the clay slurry, you can see all the sand and other contaminants that got filtered out. Next, you will want to let the filtered slurry sit for a day so the clay settles. Okay, so I've let the slurry sit for a few days now, and the clay is settled to the bottom and the water remains on the top. Now we can slowly pour the remaining water off. Be careful to only pour the water and not the clay. Okay, so there's the remaining clay slurry at the bottom. Now you want to repeat this process and let it sit for a while so more of the clay settles to the bottom and more of the water collects on top. Now you want to keep doing this process until the water is sufficiently removed. Okay, now before I start drying the slurry, I want to try and get as much water out of the mixture as I can. So there is still a little bit of water on the top, and I'm going to use a big syringe to suck up the last little bit of water. Now when you do this, you want to try and get only the water on the top. You can see I just sucked out a ton of water. Now you want to try and get as much water out of here as you can. The less water in the clay slurry, the faster it will dry. Okay, so I've brought it in my garage and put the fan on it. Now this might take a few days for all the water to evaporate. Once the water is evaporated off, which will take a few days, we can collect the clay. Okay, so it's been a few days and all of the water has been evaporated out and the clay has started to form cracks on the top. Once all the water is evaporated and you start to see cracks in the clay, that means it's ready to be harvested from the bucket. Make sure that you keep an eye on your clay and make sure it is the right consistency when you collect it. So you might have to let it sit a little bit longer, or you might have to harvest it a little bit earlier, depending on the consistency of the clay. But usually when the water is evaporated off and it started to crack, that's usually when you want to harvest it. So you can see in here, it's all kind of cracked up. I know it looks kind of weird. My little brother was poking at it. He was curious. Now what you do now is just you scoop it out. You can see it's a great consistency. Here's a piece of the clay. You can see it's the perfect consistency to start creating stuff with. And this will air dry, so you don't need a kiln or anything. If you just set it out for a few days, it will air dry. Okay, so I've taken out all the clay from the bucket, and here is one of the containers full of clay that I have harvested from the ground. And it is perfect and ready to use.